Welcome, welcome, welcome. So, hey, I wanted to quickly just discuss a couple of things we're getting some client calls on about the blockchain 51% attack that occurred on the Ethereum Classic blockchain. No shortage of folks that have taken a look at, will they be adopting some blockchain type of technology in the future? No question about a lot of hype around that. We've been advising a lot of folks there. We've certainly taken a couple of calls. Generally when that happens, I usually just do something for the larger community. Hence, here we are. I took a couple of calls about this. I want to just explain what a 51% attack is for those that aren't aware. And then also, if you're looking at adopting a blockchain solution for security, what does that really mean, right? Blockchain is all the hype. If your management hasn't asked you about it, trust me, they're thinking about it. You probably should be getting out in front of that, talking to them before a vendor does, because whatever you tell them is probably going to be more true. Unbiased maybe is the word I'm looking for. I don't know. Anyway. So just to quickly discuss a little bit, what is a 51% attack in the first place? You probably are familiar with the idea of blockchain, and you've probably heard the term that blockchain is quote unquote immutable, right? And immutable meaning that they can't, once a transaction is performed, that transaction itself can't be undone. The idea with cryptocurrencies is this enabled a currency to operate without a centralized, place of record. So, for instance, rather than having transactions route through your bank, who is now the centralized point there, now you have these transactions routing through this distributed ledger where no one organization or person controls the ledger. Now, this idea works phenomenally if there's enough people in the pool, if there's enough different places that ledger is distributed. However, and I want to be clear that we're talking specifically about proof of work blockchains. There's some other types out there. Proof of stake is one that has not really caught a lot of traction yet, but who knows? It may in the future. I don't think from a security standpoint we're going to see a lot of applications built around that, but definitely on the proof of work side, we've seen a lot of these blockchains built. And from a cryptocurrency standpoint, these make great sense. By the way, the attack on Ethereum Classic, I'll talk about in just a minute. I should note that some of the concerns here, this was specifically against cryptocurrency. They extended some other cryptocurrencies, but more importantly, I want to look at how they really apply to some of our other technologies that folks are trying to put blockchain around. So again, basically here we've got this distributed ledger. These folks then do basically mathematical computations or hashing, basically to discover or mine, as you probably heard, new blocks. On these, basically on the chain. What happened here in the 51% attack is what's called the double spend event. And basically the idea here is, for those that aren't familiar with cryptocurrency, is the idea that rather than you spending, let's say you've got $2,000 in the bank and you want to transfer $200 to another account or PayPal, let's say, for instance, right? You take $200 of your PayPal balance, but there's no tracking of which $200 specifically. In the case of cryptocurrency, you are spending specific coins or specific currency that you're then sending out to the recipient. So here we then have this blockchain piece. It's this Ethereum Classic piece. And so here we are then sending in this particular event. They sent money that then is a specific money. Ethereum Classic, specific cryptocurrency, which then likely is exchanged for something off chain. Well, the idea is that once that's been confirmed in the blockchain, that transaction's been confirmed by multiple different nodes, we're comfortable then saying that that currency is yours, and that transaction can't be reversed. Well, who decides that in a distributed ledger? There's no master node, as it were. It turns out that when 51% of the nodes in a network agree on a particular state of reality, that state becomes reality, right? So what we have here then is attackers controlled 51% of the processing power. Now, I want to be very clear here, and we'll come back to this as we talk about security in a proof of work blockchain network. We're not talking about the number of nodes. People frequently confuse this when we talk to them. They're like, well, so-and-so over here, because we've heard of this as supply chain applications that are there. they would only have one node. And it's like, time out, brother. It has nothing to do with the number of nodes. It has everything to do with the amount of computational power. Now, a couple of folks have noted where they're like, well, that happened in Ethereum Classic. That could never happen in Bitcoin or in Ethereum, the core branch of Ethereum, as it were. Ethereum Classic and Ethereum, by the way, actually did what they call a hard fork back when there was another problem. This was around an actual library that was used for building smart contracts, had a vulnerability. People spent a lot or stole a lot based on that vulnerability. Then there became a question in the community of how do we resolve this, right? And one possible resolution was to roll back the blockchain to a particular point in time, the Ethereum blockchain, to a particular point in time, and then fork the code and say, look, this is it, right? Mining pools are going this way with the blockchain as it was at the state with this vulnerability in this library fix. This is the way we're rolling forward, and that's it, right? So all the transactions that happened over the last several days didn't happen effectively. They wiped them off the map. Well, some miners didn't go with them with that, and that then became Ethereum Classic, right? So you have now what is Ethereum effectively is fractured, and you've seen this already in Bitcoin, right? Bitcoin and Bitcoin Cash, there was a hard fork there that actually impacted that. Right. So just to give a couple of definitions for those that aren't familiar with cryptocurrency. By the way, again, while what we're talking about is a cryptocurrency event, I want to point out here that these types of issues are inherent in the underlying technology, not cryptocurrency itself. Right. So basically, there's there's that piece there. This is I'm getting a note in chat about could happen in any mainstream coin because there are miner pools that control a good portion of computational power. Well, that's actually been one of the points brought up by some of the folks who are talking about the hard fork. The 51% attack on Ethereum Classic. One of the things that keeps getting brought up is about that. Because this is a relatively small cryptocurrency, don't worry, it won't happen anywhere else. It wouldn't happen in a core cryptocurrency like Ethereum or Bitcoin because there's so many miners out there. And those miners, because they're then calculating at ridiculous hash rates, trying to mine these new blocks, they then account for such a large portion of the mining pools. Of the overall network computational power, these mining pools account for that computational power, that a 51% attack becomes less likely. The logic there is we're going to go with, in my mind at least, a little less than sound, right? And there's a couple of reasons for this, right? When it comes down to it, the question of a 51% attack, I always, when somebody says it's unlikely that would happen, it's unlikely that anyone would do that, I have to step back and say, who is anyone? Who are we talking about there specifically? Because we're talking about a nation state who's trying to destabilize an economy that's wrapped up around, has some amount of, currency in Bitcoin or is cashing out to fiat or you name it. This becomes a little bit more, concerning. We're talking about what nation states, do operations, computer network exploitation operations for personal gain. I say personal gain, but state financial gain, direct state financial gain. Obviously China very good at stealing intellectual property. So are others out there. Certainly, I doubt the U.S. is immune to that either, despite obvious denials. But look, North Korea, right? They've kind of broken the mold on this, right? It's no longer would no longer be an unprecedented event. North Korea themselves have used computer network exploitation to target financial goals. I don't think there's much doubt at this point that North Korea is behind the Bangladesh central bank heist. Certainly that there. Then WannaCry, I think, is pretty widely attributed to them as well at this point. And I believe WannaCry probably got out a little earlier than they intended, and as a result didn't raise a lot of money for them. It still raised more than $100,000, for them, but it wasn't the millions that it could have been if the encryption piece and the ransomware had worked effectively and generated unique session keys and unique payment addresses and all that, right, or pseudo unique. So there's a lot playing there, right? So the question of could it happen to a bigger cryptocurrency, because that's one of the things that people are pushing. It's like, well, in a big one, it wouldn't happen there because it would require so much more because these mining pools. Well, yes, it would require more more power. There's no question about that. I mean, computational power, no question about the requiring more there. The question is then, what's the payoff, right? In the case of Ethereum Classic, it was nobody's really making any money on this. Coinbase, by the way, detected this. And detected the attempted double spend and the fracturing of the chains, right? The separation, because effectively what they're seeing as a rollback, Coinbase operates so many nodes, all of a sudden now they have two different pictures of these basically of where the blockchain is at, right? That you've got two forks of reality, as it were. And this wouldn't be what we would call one of those hard forks. This is a basically when we say a fork, right? We're saying two different pictures of the blockchain itself. Then as excuse me. Then, as we kind of think forward a little bit on that, what does that really, what does that really mean? Well, Coinbase, seeing that, says, hey, there's a glitch in the matrix here, right? We've got a bunch of nodes saying this transaction is confirmed, and then the real bad part, the Coinbase, kind of said, nope, done, and paused trading, sending and receiving of Ethereum Classic funds, was when they saw some of the same currency was attempted to spend initially in version, whatever you want to call it, version T, and then in version transaction prime, T prime, those same coins, the same currency, is then trying to be spent again elsewhere. And so we call this a double spend event, right? So again, the idea, and people ask, well, what do you mean double spend? The spend didn't occur, right? Well, yes, technically that's correct. When you have a double spend event, the follow-up to the initial spend, the fraudulent spend, is that some action off blockchain is being taken, right? So I've transferred money to you or currency to you on Ethereum Classic, and then as a result, you transferred, let's say, Bitcoin to me. Well, I can reverse the transaction on the Ethereum blockchain, the Ethereum Classic blockchain, and you can't on the Bitcoin blockchain. Game on, I just won, right? So I've traded something of value, or sorry, something of no value for your something of value. Right? So that's kind of the play there, right? So yeah, with sufficient processing power, to the point in chat here, with sufficient processing power, there's no question that somebody could take over even a much larger blockchain. Now, the number with the amount of processing power going up, the amount of mining pools on a given blockchain going up, the likelihood of that probably decreases. Although again, bear in mind, the more miners there are, typically the miners are there because there's some payoff there. Could it happen on a larger blockchain? Absolutely, it could. It just would require more processing power. Right now, I don't believe for a minute, by the way, I mentioned before, like a nation, what would a nation state do or something? I do believe that a nation state could effectively, somebody with nation state resources could effectively target the Ethereum blockchain or the Bitcoin blockchain or the Bitcoin Cash blockchain. I do believe that that's computationally possible. I don't think it's easy, and I don't think for a minute, by the way, that this Bitcoin Cash would Bitcoin Cash, excuse me, Ethereum Classic. I looked at weird forks of, but the Ethereum Classic, I don't believe for a minute that was nation state. I just think that it's that again, a nation state would probably be required to get the amount of processing power, right? But it would be really interesting, right? If you had a, and I think we're seeing something really interesting with the Coinbase side, and the thing that was really interesting to me in this Ethereum Classic, double spend event, is that it was detected by Coinbase, and they stopped it, right? And they paused trading, and as a result, here you've got what is probably your largest trading platform here suspending trading. Now they can't say you can't spend anything, but they did say, hey, we're done. You can't send or receive from our wallets on this. Basically we're pausing that, and I think that's really interesting because what we're seeing there now effectively is. And I'm not a big cryptocurrency, person, but I think it's very interesting philosophically. The cryptocurrency side has been all about decentralization, right? And what you're seeing now is a big player in the market, Coinbase. And look, I understand why they paused trading. They were financially motivated to do so, right? Any spending that occurred there from that point on could easily be fraud. I know there's some question about. I've heard already that the Ethereum Classic folks. Have said that there were some folks testing some new ASICs, application-specific integrated circuits that could have resulted in the fractured chains, but doesn't explain the double spend. and there's been some question they kind of kicked out and said, well, wait, there could be another explanation. Look, understandably, right, anybody who's involved in the core project, I suspect, is pretty well vested in Ethereum Classic. A double spend event like this certainly shakes the confidence that people would have in that as a currency. So I would just be wise to, the motivations of those around. I will tell you from a motivation standpoint, I have no stake in any cryptocurrency. So there's not, I'm not saying like Bitcoin Cash is bad or Ethereum Classic is bad or stick with the big ones or the small ones or not saying any of that. I have no stake in any of this. But I do run into clients who are very, very concerned about getting on the blockchain bandwagon. And I want to shift gears here and talk a little bit about security of these blockchain applications. RSA is around the corner, and Black Hat obviously last year. I missed RSA last year. Brandon McCrillis had a chance to go and represent Rendition. I say a chance. Basically, Sands offered me a gig. I recognized that gig overlapped RSA, and I jumped on it like a hobo on a ham sandwich. And then when RSA popped up, that left Brandon having to go. I couldn't have been any happier for him to have gone and represented us there, and me not. That said, everything that was, everything that was there on the, everything was there from a vendor standpoint. We saw a big push to blockchain. I saw that again at Black Hat. So as we look at stuff like this, coming around, I think that there's a lot of people that are looking at blockchain. I'll tell you, when I did a big banking conference middle of last year, middle of 2018, like every third question that I had was not about like, hey, how do we prevent, Swift, Swift transactions after the Bangladesh bank heist. Nobody's talking about that. A little bit about business email compromise, but like every third question was, how will blockchain impact security of my devices? And I'm like, dude, it totally, man. Anyway, I would say it totally won't. We have to get functional blockchain solutions first. And I don't see those in the market yet from a security standpoint. But let's talk about those, whether we're talking about security or supply chain management or whatever, right? Blockchain really, when we talk about why blockchain and not a traditional database, and I'm not going to get on my whole blockchain soapbox about like, does it require blockchain? Probably not, right? But I'm not going to get on that. Let's just talk about the security of this, particularly in light of a 51% attack, because this is what I discuss with people all the time when they ask, is a blockchain right for my solution? And the first thing I ask them is, should it be a decentralized solution? What are you buying with a decentralized, right? And the analogy that I give here, because when I ask the question, I swear people look at me 9 times out of 10 like I've got like 3 heads. They're like, what do you mean, why wouldn't I want a decentralized solution, right? Well, a decentralized solution is running on somebody else's machines, right? Well, let's be clear about that, right? A centralized solution, the benefit of centralization is you control it. You control it, right? And I kind of step back and I say, okay, well, if we're not controlling it, right? If we don't control that, technology, right? If we're decentralizing it, does that make sense for our application? For instance, right? I bought a new car this last year, right? And I was blown away by some of the options. I hadn't had a new car since 2013, and I ran. The rental cars are always stripped down, when I'm traveling, and so I go in there to like look at a car, and there are features that not only do I not care about, I can't fathom who actually cares about this, right? Like I had to ask in a couple of cases, like, who asked for this, right? Like, I'm sure not paying you extra for this, but who even asked for this feature? The salesperson's like, well, I was in here and this person last week thought it was the coolest thing since sliced bread. I'm like, neat. Look, TLDR, this goes for any feature, for any solution. Maybe ask yourself, instead of somebody pointing to you and going, see that shiny thing? Salespeople, by the way, love this, right? Because they're like, it's a differentiator that doesn't matter. Right, there's the old story. Maybe you ever heard the story about, there's a car dealership giving away vacations, right? Like you buy a new car, get a free vacation, and they've got a vacation to France and a vacation to Greece, and the vacation to France is just cheaper than the vacation to Greece, like maybe $100 cheaper. But the more people they convince to go to France, the better off they are. Greece sounds better because it is France, right? How do you lure people to go to France, right? Because it's France, right? How do you lure people to go there? Look, the answer is that they offer a third option, right? And the third option, because it's difficult for people to compare the value of Greece and France, the vacations there, they're using some external factors. But when you have a third option, when you say, do you want Greece? Do you want France? You got France with free breakfast. It doesn't matter that free breakfast was already included because everywhere you go in Europe, breakfast is included in the hotels anyway. Nobody cared about any of that. The fact of the matter is that, I say everywhere you go, it's most places you go, but the fact of the matter is that you were getting free breakfast anyway. But when they threw that in there, they created an easy for you to distinguish, and even if they had to pay for the breakfast separately, they created an easy to distinguish piece. And then from that point on, France is going to knock Greece straight out of the park, right? So by adding features, even if people don't care about those features, even if they aren't useful features, salespeople are able to kind of shift you over into a particular choice. And there's some study about this in psychology, behavioral economics. Sometimes you hear it referred to as decision engineering or choice engineering. Anyway, so look, when people talk about decentralization of a platform, I have to step back and say, do I even want that in the first place? From a security standpoint, my answer is no. I don't want it. I don't want it, right? And so when I kind of step back and I say, what are we buying with that decentralization? In a cryptocurrency, it makes perfect sense. I totally understand why we want that in a cryptocurrency. Separately, I do have to kind of step back and say, when I have a couple of big trading platforms who can arbitrarily block people, which by the way, Coinbase is also done recently, block people and companies from trading there, you're starting to lose some of that whole autonomy there. When we've got some major players in the market, which is, I think, what most economists believe will going to happen anyway, right? Is that decentralized neat, but eventually big players will come into the market who will de facto control that, market. That's happening with miners already. It's happening certainly with some of the big trading platforms. But on a security standpoint, do you want to decentralize? I think not. My big concern there comes back to, and let's talk about like the supply chain, blockchain type scenarios, right? So one of the ones that we keep hearing about consistently is Walmart's blockchain. I'm not going to talk about their implementation because I don't have any back-end information there, other than they're building it off of IBM's blockchain platform, whatever that means, right? And so I know IBM is working on hosted blockchains, which has to be the funniest thing I've ever heard, because like, no, don't worry, you won't have a 51% attack because we control the whole thing. And I'm like, time out. Why then do I want this thing if you control the blockchain and people are just submitting data from externally into and putting, if you control the whole thing, it's no longer decentralized. So one of my big promises, this is like me going in and buying a car because, it's awesome. And, and at that point, then I don't own it. Yeah, somebody's joking or maybe half joking, I don't know. Isn't that just IOTA? I don't want my office to be firebombed tonight, so I'm not going to talk bad about IOTA. But the one thing I know about IOTA and IOTA, if you want to go and look this up, and if you do, definitely look at the vitriol thrown towards Matthew Green, who published some, let's be fair, actual issues, and I even say this pensively with IOTA, but absolutely they tore him up, and there's just constant ad hominem attacks, and I don't need that in my life, so I'm not going to talk bad about IOTA. I will say this, that real platforms will happily, accept criticism versus some of these crazy fake platforms, right? Or fake was not the word I'm looking for here. Gosh, I can't even finish the sentence there. How about this? Look, real vendors are always open to security issues. How about that? That's where I'm at, right? Okay. So yeah, I'm not going to get into the flame war with them because that's just going to happen. Is it like that? Meh. It's a blockchain that you don't control. I guess that's probably a good point there. And again, if it's all on IBM stuff, it's not decentralized, right? If you told me, for instance, okay, no, that's not true. It is decentralized because it's in, it's in multiple different areas, or we load balance it around or whatever. Again, none of this is impressing me. It sounds like something would be better off with a database, right? That's what it comes down to. So again, I want you to think about, as somebody talks, my big thing coming in here was one to talk about what a double spend is and how does it work. And again, it comes down to 51% of, right? And it's technically not 51%, it's greater than 50%, which is why it could be 50.0001%, right? From a nation state standpoint, and once you have that, sorry, so you finish this one thought and I'll move on to the next here. But once you have that basically a majority of the power, the computational power, at that point, then you control the direction of the chain, right? And so obviously this is a security concern. If you are deploying an application, I hear these talked about for logging. One of the ones that horrifies me, honestly, is healthcare, right? When people start talking about it, they're like, yeah, and I have to be honest, when I first heard about blockchain, I thought about some of the problems, non-repudiation problems that would solve when it comes to access of medical records, et cetera, right? So picture one of the problems we're running today with medical records is, Nurse Jackie comes in and looks at a particular, let's say, high-profile patient, right? Like I don't know, NFL player or something, right? And looks at that and then leaks it out to the news, right? Well, leaks out his condition, his status, right? Maybe he's in there getting a checkup, but there's something wrong. He's not gonna be able to play 2 weeks from now, or who knows, right? Whatever. Anyway, so basically they go in and try to find out who's had access to that. Well, logging, as it were, right? The idea with the blockchain piece would be immutable. So I liked that. I was like, yeah, this is going to solve some problem. I can't tell you how many forensic investigations we've worked over the last many years with our healthcare clients, looking for, piecing together who had access to what when, right? And it feels like you'd be doing more of this logging now, knowing this is a thing, but rock on with the blockchain, we'd be set. We know who looked at it, when they looked at it, every piece of data, totally immutable. And I liked that. I thought that was going to be a solution. I have to tell you now, I'm a little more concerned about that, right? Because I have to step back now and ask, who's running those nodes, right? Now, another big feature that we talk about with blockchains, because it's decentralized and no single entity controls it, the hospital and this unaffiliated doctor's office, and they could be working off of the same EHR, electronic health record chain, without worrying about who controls it. Now, I think that's hogwash. And again, the reason I'm going to come back to that is mom and pop doctor's office, right, with 3 practicing physicians, does not have the computational power that big hospital code does, right? That's running a hospital network that crosses, most of the Midwest, right? They're just not the same. They're not even remotely the same. It's stupid for us to pretend that they're the same, right? And if that's the case, that EHR blockchain, as it were, is hosted by or adopted by or whatever big hospital code, they almost certainly, at 0 day, as they start out, or your D-Day, or whatever we're going to call this, they almost certainly have the majority of the computational power. Okay, so then wrap that back around then and ask yourself, or I'm going to wrap back around and ask myself, okay, well, what happens then? Do they have it in their threat model that mom and pop doctor's office, or literally anybody else that can put a node on the chain, as it were? That's one of the, by the way, with these private blockchains, is one of the things that prevents some external attacks, is even getting access, to. But let's assume for a moment we do have mom and pop doctor's office. They are running a node or a couple of nodes or whatever for entry, data processing and whatnot onto these, and can put data onto these nodes. Well, if suddenly they go and rent a GPU farm at Amazon, right, or Google Cloud or Azure or whatever, then suddenly they may actually be dwarfing the computational power of hospital big code, right? Well, okay, what can they do with that now? Well, again, if we're talking about let's say malpractice, right? That was another thing that got hit up, right? It's like, well, and by the way, some of this stuff is a little bit, if you know how hospitals work in the first place, some of these claims are ridiculous on their face, right? Where they're like, well, the hospitals won't be able to change records, and cover up malpractice or whatever. It's like, dude, it's not like they're recording stuff in real time. Like the doctor's like, cut there, and they record that at the moment. If they were going to lie, they're going to keep, I mean, the data's going in after the surgery kind of thing type deal. I get it. There's probably some limited number of scenarios where this occurs, but okay, great. Let's suppose for a moment that, this small mom and pop place, because of a multi-million-dollar lawsuit, needs to be able, or that they see coming, says, oh, let's go spend $10,000. We'll rent enough CPU or GPU power to take over the 51% of this chain, right? Is this a valid attack surface? The answer is, yeah, actually, it is, right? They could potentially do that, and if they do that, their picture of the chain becomes everybody's picture of the chain. Now, how far back do you need to roll back? That's really the big question, right? Because the further you need to roll back, the harder it is to do without easily detecting it. Now, before somebody flames me in comments, because I can feel it coming. I got a little spidey sense there that somebody's going to say, but it can always be easily detected, right? yeah, great. I can throw out any number of other things in information security that can always be easily detected too, that regularly aren't. Business email compromise, phishing, right? I mean, everybody out there is like, oh, a phishing solution. How many of them actually work? Right. Anyway, what I'm going to say here is, yes, you can detect it. Is anybody architecting for this today? I think no. I think blockchain technology in general is pretty young, but again, in production outside of cryptocurrency is very young. But I do want to kind of highlight the risk that we run here with these truly decentralized chains, right? Again, if you're crossing organizational boundaries, the question becomes, who specifically has a motive to manipulate the chain, right? And if they can do so, if it's financially viable for them to do so, rock on. Now let's strip out the whole financial interest side of this, and let's talk about nation-state attacks, right? Because I want to mention a couple of things that a lot of folks have not addressed up to this point with some of the some of the possibilities for nation-state attacks, it's that the motive isn't always money, right? If we've got, let's say, a supply chain blockchain, and it's supply chain related to, I don't even care, insert whatever here that you've heard about, produce, for instance, right? Let's talk about produce, right? In the middle of an E. coli scare or whatever, the idea would be that you could just flip a switch and you know exactly it came from that farm and where did all the products from that farm go. Well, first off, that didn't require blockchain in the first place. I'm just going to stop it right there. But okay, we did it on blockchain because that's what Walmart's doing right now or in a pilot at least with IBM's blockchain tech, and so neat. I'm all happy about that. But let's say for a moment that becomes truly decentralized, where growers, as opposed to inputting something in a portal that's run effectively by IBM and going on the chain there, suppose for a moment that now you've got thousands of growers and suppliers and processing plants and whatever around around the country, and let's say around North America even, that are or even around the world that are doing this. What's to stop somebody from, let's say, nation state China, Russia, whoever, boogeyman country X, from trying to cause some turmoil there? I throw China. I'm thinking China right now just because of the trade war with China, right? I mean, I'm not picking China because they're a boogeyman. It's a trade thing and supply chain trade. I just see this, kind of in my mind's eye. Certainly, they don't need necessarily a financial motive. It may simply be to disrupt the market. Does that benefit China in a trade war? Absolutely, it does. And certainly undermines consumer confidence. And I can see, again, this being used maybe as a replacement for kinetic action, or possibly a prelude to kinetic action, right? Could be another, piece there, right? So I'm kind of in that mode of like, hey, could they take control of a piece of a chain? The other thing that I'm going to mention here too is, and this could extend easily to cryptocurrency as well. If you had a country that was willing, and I'm not saying how realistic, would somebody do, right? I want to be clear that we're not talking necessarily about the would. I'm more on the technology of the could. Could somebody, do this? And this being, could they take control of some of the mining pools, right? And I look at the mining pools for Bitcoin. The vast majority of them sit in China, the mining power of Bitcoin sits in China. Cheap energy. They've got a lot of them built next to hydroelectric dams, and you name it, right? So they've got the power coming in. A lot of the ASICs, most of the ASICs are built there anyway. Application-specific integrated circuits, and anyway, so could China as a country take over pieces of those and privatize, commercialize, and governmentize, like eminent domain style, take over those mining pools to perform some type of financial attack? Maybe, right? Let's take that out of it because that's a very, very overt move. If you were willing to, or you're trying to accomplish some larger transaction, granted this would be playing a long game, but could you target ISPs, right? If you take nodes offline for some period of time and you shrink the size of the mining pool, isn't that an interesting take, right? Now, of course, there's the issue of what do you do once those come back online? But again, if your goal is to disrupt a market, I don't know that you care, right? I don't know that you care. You're sowing that seed of discontent, right? So that would be another. I'll throw that out there, right? I mean, certainly ISP level attacks and taking nodes offline, and then basically then as those this could be done with BGP. It could be done with actually attacking the ISPs directly that connect some of these mining pools to the networks. you name it, right? Or so the networks, the internet, but you name it. Again, just kind of kicking out there that those are possibilities, right? Well, okay, so let's roll this back into should I be deploying a blockchain solution in my environment? Again, I'm going to come back and say it depends on what for. I won't get into the full blockchain piece here, but the a couple of considerations right off the bat are, what does my threat model look like for now the fact that this technology is distributed, the data is distributed, ledger is distributed, and I need effectively, right, for that on that distributed ledger, I need to be able to track those transactions, right? Well, okay, great, that's awesome, but does somebody else on that ledger, can somebody else modify those transactions, right? And what does my threat model look like for that? What would a detection event look like for that, right? If somebody's modifying transactions there. Again, how do I detect it? How would I respond to it contractually as well as technologically, right? There's a question, a great example of this, by the way, came down to smart contracts, and we haven't even touched those. And I don't have time to go into the whole lay of those, but I'll mention there was a technology called Soarcoin that kicked off, gosh, I feel like 2 years ago. Soarcoin, SOAR, they were trying to become like a PayPal style thing. It seemed like horrible ideas. And like many of these, small offerings, their white paper was pretty much all they had going. But interestingly enough, though, they sold a stake in Soarcoin, $5 million worth, to a company in Australia who was a cryptocurrency trading house. And based on the execution of the smart contract for Soarcoin, they gave them basically $5 million in what Soarcoin was trading at, because last year everything that was a coin had a value because all of them did. They gave them $5 million worth of this. Soarcoin, for whatever reason, FOMO or whatever, starts trending a little bit, and by a little bit I mean like it went up by 20%, right? So now they've got $6.5 million, give or take, in Soarcoin currency, and they go to liquidate. Well, at the day they go to liquidate some of that currency, this trading house, what you have effectively is you've got you've got a total of $200,000, give or take, trading ceiling over the last couple of weeks. These guys go to liquidate, I think, $2 million. Obviously, they crashed the market. I mean, they destroyed what little market there was for Soarcoin, but by trying to trade too much of it, right? Now, there's almost no question at this point that we're already seeing Bitcoin and other cryptocurrency market manipulations. If you watched the John Oliver special on some of the cryptocurrency stuff, like he even talks about the Telegram groups, right, where they've got advertising. So they're like, yeah, so as long as you're part of our group, right, we're gonna text you which ones to buy, and we're gonna pump the price up, and as people jump in, we're gonna get out with stuff that is blatantly illegal, right? Blatantly illegal, right? So alas, I say blatantly illegal, probably not in the cryptocurrency market, but everywhere else, blatantly illegal. They go like pump and dump scams, right? It's just so ridiculous. Anyway, TLDR, so you've got these other kind of crazy coins kind of hanging out there. Meanwhile, these guys try to go liquidate the Soarcoin. Right, and so as they liquidate the Soarcoin, they crash the market. And by the way, this is the trading house who sold, basically exchanged for $5 million in Soarcoin, I believe it was 40 some odd percent stake or 45% stake in their actual organization. So what happens next is, from a smart contract standpoint, the smart contract for Soarcoin, which is built off of the Ethereum blockchain, not the Ethereum Classic, the regular core Ethereum blockchain. They had a smart contract there, and effectively that smart contract basically said anybody with this private key owns all of Soarcoins. Well, that's neat if you own that private key, and if you don't, you pretty much don't. And so you can have currency, but anyone else can spend it. They can take it back at any point. I mean, it turns out, yeah, they can. And in fact, if you read the white paper, they talk about how they can keep an interest in Soarcoin to be able to stabilize the market. If, there's a bunch of other stuff they've got in there, you name it. Basically then, as these guys try to go liquidate, the Soarcoin owner, turns around, takes that private key and says nope, and reclaims a bunch of that Soarcoin to restore the market. Basically, they reverse that transaction. Now enter into a new legal battle, right? Because at this point, they have exchanged, and this is months after the fact, they've signed over in, you can call it digital space for the cryptocurrency side and meat space for, for the exchange of shares in the company. Again, we've got one thing that's controlled by a smart contract, one thing that's controlled by a contract. And the actual paper contract that said, we will sell you this, was not for the 5 million Soarcoin. This is really interesting. It said, we will basically generate this or fulfill this contract, this smart contract. And they did fulfill that smart contract by giving them the coins. The reality was there's a backdoor smart contract. Now, it was trivial backdoor. It wasn't like anybody has to go audit it. If you knew what you were looking at, you'd be like, hey, who owns that private key? And it took minutes looking at it. You're like, who the hell signed this kind of thing, right? Well, the Soarcoin owner said exactly that. They said, look, these guys over here, they had the ability to review this. They had a due diligence requirement to review it. They should have reviewed it. They didn't review it. It's on them. We didn't do anything wrong. We had the ability to do this the whole time. And we said, even here in our white paper, see this thing that we had for them. And we said that with them, they would, if they crashed the market, which they did, we would be required to come back. And we didn't think they'd do it, but somebody could have. And isn't it great we have the safety valve here? And then they're kind of like, yeah, but now we reclaim the money, and so it's kind of ours, right? And so eventually this all gets worked out. I believe it got settled in Singapore ports. If I remember, it was an Australian company, but I believe Soarcoin's in Singapore. And I think it got settled one quarter or another here now. The point being, right, like as we start looking at some of this stuff, that there's a really interesting play between the meat space and the crypto markets, right? And so, while a smart contract itself is not legally binding, here we have an example of a legally binding contract being written around the fulfillment of the smart contract, right? Look, my go-to point here is that, if you have a smart contract-based blockchain solution, which I've seen a couple of folks sort of out there like, don't worry, this creates a contract that everyone can look at. It's like, well, I am worried because I'm worried that people are sucked in by the allure of it without understanding the what is it, right? And how is that going to play? And so that bothers me. That worries me. But I think my bigger worry, again, for me, as I start looking at blockchain style solutions in enterprise, and again, taking the cryptocurrency back out of an enterprise, it's the who controls the processing power. Is it proof of stake or proof of work? Most of them that we've seen up to this point have been proof of work rather than proof of stake. And then, basically the who's going to control the nodes, can I add new nodes? And then what's my detection and what's my rollback contractually and technically if somebody does manipulate the chain, right? My big fear here as a forensic analyst, right, is that people are putting a lot of stock in the blockchain is immutable. And obviously Coinbase was on their toes this time, and I couldn't be any happier. Super happy Coinbase is on their toes, and they detected it. And they stopped the trading, at least on their platform, and said, hey, we're not going to, no sending or receiving on our platform, right? Good, like that, right? Okay, cool. Now you've implemented, and I want you to threat model this in your own organization. You've implemented a blockchain solution for logging, for EHR, for supply chain, for you're depending on the immutability of that. And I'm guessing contract language is wrapped around the immutability of that as well. First off, let's admit it's not immutable, right? I think that's step one. Right, there are practical attacks against it. Are they unlikely? Sure. Right? Should we say that, or do they require resources? Yeah, absolutely. Should we say they're impossible? Absolutely not. Right? We need to be realistic about this with our management and with our leadership. Second thing is, as forensic investigators, as security folks, we have to war game out how much stock are we going to put in this. One of the great examples that I throw into this and I talk about here when we talk about forensics is event log editing. For years, it was taken as gospel that if you had Windows event logs, they were there and they were in order and that was it. You couldn't go in and surgically pluck out a log while the machine was running. Now, we saw years ago that at least the Chinese and the Russians had this capability, right? And we found this by hunting the negative space. But I'll tell you, we argued with, and when I say hunting the negative space, by the way, I mean, I'm looking at, I know the normal sequence of events, right? I've got let's say, for instance, I had a log on event, and I know that's going to be followed eventually by a log off event. And so what I would have is I'd have the log off with no log on, right? And so what they were doing there, they were like hunting for an IP address, and they were getting the 4624, and they weren't getting rid of the, garbage, that's the log off, regardless. Anyway, mental block here for the log off event. But basically what I have is a log off without a corresponding log on. I know the log on must be there. The fact that it's not there tells me somebody removed it, right? When you see enough of these with a particular other set of TTPs, you can say, yeah, they've got this capability, but we're not hunting based on what we're seeing, we're hunting based on what we're not seeing, right? That's a much more challenging effort, as you can imagine. It's not effectively a grep, it's a go find patterns that shouldn't exist in nature, right? Well, okay, how do we then do that in a blockchain environment, right? Again, we put a lot of, and I use the event log example for this as a corollary because it is the corollary, right? Folks talked about them as, and I can go pull out books, forensics books, textbooks, right, where they talk about the immutability of Windows event logs. Well, again, we know that's not the case, right? With the shadow brokers dumps, we know that there are now everybody who knows how to download from GitHub now has code that they can look at that shows how to edit event logs, right? And surgically remove event log entries. And so we've seen an uptick at Rendition in our incident response work in the modification of these things that were originally believed to be immutable. So okay, great. That's certainly become a challenge for us and for others, right? And by the way, if you're talking to folks who are working nation-state intrusions now, and they're like, no, we've never seen anybody edit an event log before, be worried. Be really worried about competency there, because I'm going to tell you, again, there's usually not a bunch of residue associated with it. It's really saying this pattern here there's stuff missing because they deleted a piece, but not the whole piece, right? They're still leaving a couple of breadcrumbs. Maybe they stole the loaf but left the crumbs kind of thing, right? That's the analogy I roll with there. Well, again, if we're talking about blockchain tech, right, how do we then get to a point where, and quickly, right, where we understand that it's not immutable, right? We shouldn't be having a discussion about something that is immutable in 2019, right? I think that we have to step back and say, okay, look, we believe there's a better chance, right, that this wouldn't be edited, right, because of the processing power required. But let's open our minds up to that possibility, as well as before we deploy something like this, I absolutely want to know what would a double spend event, and if it's not cryptocurrency on a spend, what would a double commit event or a blockchain reorganization event, what is that going to look like? How am I going to detect it? And then what do I do? What are my contractual obligations back to other parties who are invested in this blockchain? And then finally, how do I respond to it from a technical standpoint? Are we going to roll back to a specific point before the reorganization? What happens contractually with, and I want you to think about this from a supplier standpoint, right? If let's say we're talking about supply chain safety, and so there's a reorganization event, it takes us 16, 18 hours to go ahead and pull the plug and say, okay, no, it's here. We definitely need to roll back. Well, great, for the last 16, 18 hours, whatever, people have been presumably continuing to add entries to the chain. Okay, so what are we doing now? Are they going to re-add those entries to the chain? Do we trust any of those entries? You see where the problems run in here, right? And these are not non-trivial problems. We've also discussed in the past, and I said I wasn't going to get into the whole blockchain thing, but I will throw out one more kind of point here before we break, and that's if you're thinking about blockchain tech and the immutability of it, what are you going to do when somebody puts something illicit or that needs to be purged for contractual requirements, on that chain, right? So let's say you've got a contractual obligation to retain data for no more than a particular period of time. If some of that data goes onto a blockchain solution, how do you remove that data, right? That then becomes a pretty interesting and pretty profound question, because if you have the requirement to remove it, but that's not all that's on that chain, right? How do you get that off of the chain, right? And that is a significant question that we need to answer moving forward. Now, this obviously isn't a confidentiality type issue. This becomes how do we get rid of almost a counter integrity issue, right? We do want to modify this immutable resource. How do we remove that? How do we service a right to be forgotten? How do we deal with even, again, illicit? My worst case scenario is that somebody pops some child porn or something onto that. Or if you're in a multi-layered, if you work in a classified environment, right, and you have secret data that ends up on an unclassified blockchain, how do you purge that? And now I'm into the, I won't say crazy, it doesn't impact everybody, but you can see where suddenly these are some questions that have to be pretty hard asks here, right? And again, these are things a lot of people aren't thinking about. As you get asked by management, should we be deploying this? The answer is maybe, right? But let's answer some of these questions first, right? And if you can answer them to your satisfaction and it still makes sense for you, rock on, a blockchain could be for you. And if not, maybe no, right? And that's kind of where I'll close it out there, barring any questions. So let's see, what do I have here? Signature schemes. Do I think signature schemes need major work on to be future ready? That's a great question. I think a lot of this has to do with basically how are we going to digitally sign and say basically this is kind of your end of chain, right? Do signature schemes need work? I think a lot of this depends on way too much outside of stuff that I don't have good answers on. Like, quantum computing, I think is certainly something that, that is something that's going to change. It's going to be a game changer for a lot of reasons. But if your whole currency is tied up in the inability to quickly calculate a SHA-256 or a SHA-512, that is concerning, right? I guess that would be my only. I think that's what you were asking there, but I won't swear to it. That's why I interpret the question. If I'm missing it, please hit me back in chat. But I think I do think that's going to be an issue. But I don't think it's going to be an issue today, right? Then again, SHA-1 wasn't broken until it was, right? If you remember the SHA-1 apocalypse that we've just been through, that accelerated because not so much because of computing advances, meaning like hardware advances, wasn't a Moore's law issue. We had a schedule based on when Moore's law was going to make SHA-1 a problem. It was advances in mathematics. This is what made SHA-1 a problem really quick, much quicker than it would have been otherwise, years quicker than it would have been otherwise. And so, I am certainly not the guy who's going to tell you the same thing will or will not happen with another, hashing algorithm. I don't know. Right? But that's another great question. Certainly, quantum computing is going to change the game there. It's going to change the game in so much other stuff. I don't know if I think I'm more concerned about a computing advance that, any place too that somebody holds central keys or centralized, holds those keys. Again, if we're talking about, dare I use the words IOTA, because there are some things that they control centrally in the network still. Or at least last check, I don't keep up on 100% of all IOTA news, so don't IOTA flame me here. But, certainly there's that. I think centralized blockchain makes no sense to me. That's just a very inefficient database is the way I look at it. But hey, rock on. Bottom line, use this, catalog this away, this double spend event on a dare I say, fairly major cryptocurrency. Look, major versus not major is being actively traded on Coinbase. I'm just going to throw that out there. It's being actively traded on Coinbase. It's major enough that it has a presence in the major trading floor. It used to be like if you're serious about stocks, or if you're a serious stock, you're traded on the S&P, you're traded on NASDAQ, and if you're not, then maybe you're not. Well, I kind of put this then, Ethereum Classic up in the you're traded on Coinbase. That seems pretty, I don't know, seems reasonable, reasonably sized. Look, you had an attack against that. Anything else that we're doing internally, right? Internally building a blockchain app for supply chain, for security, for insert problem here, I think we have just as big of problems, right? So basically here I'm still of the opinion you just need a database for all blockchain stuff and technically work in the space, right? I'm not 100% of the opinion that you always just need a database, and you've probably heard this if you followed me for any period of time. You've probably heard me say I'm inherently distrustful of any vendor that says the words "just," and they're like, "You just need." I'm inherently distrustful. I'm like, whoa, what am I missing? Because when the word "just" comes out, there's usually some stuff we're missing, right? So when I hear "just need a database," I'm a little fearful there, but I understand where you're going with that, right? The "just need a database" is most cases, I think you're right. I think most applications that people talk about where they're like, hey, we need blockchain for this, this will solve a problem. I look back and I'm like, could we do it better with a database, right? And we haven't even gotten into the growth of the computational growth over time and all that, and replicating, basically replicating the chain is another issue, and I'm kind of down with you probably are better off with a database in most scenarios, but I try to avoid getting to absolutes, right? started to say I never get into absolutes, which would be an absolute, but you get the idea. Yeah, I think I'm with you there generally, right? Most stuff can be used. Most of the solutions that we're hearing today, they're jumping on a technology. Some other ones that I heard that are really neat, where they're like, oh, this is going to allow people to broker power back to the grid or insert whatever. Hey, great, neat. But what they don't do there is they don't solve the how are you going to actually policy-wise. You have a policy problem here first, and if you solve the policy problem, does it really matter at that point, right? So anyway, so any other questions before we break? Hey, awesome. No, I appreciate it. So apparently I got a rating of better than random Twitch channels during work, right? So awesome. I appreciate that. Like I said, really just doing this because we had a couple of client questions on it. I figured I could kind of run through this for the greater public, and the next time somebody calls, I can just say, hey, and I can give them the recording link, and that's usually my go-to. It's one of the reasons I do this seriously, and we'll pop this up on the Rendition blog just because, you know, again, we find that when stuff like this happens and people have questions, it's easy to kind of kick this, you know, do a recording, and then I can stop individually doing these. So I hear it's literally came from Twitch right now. It's night here. Well, there we go. So, okay, well, I won't be on Twitch later, but yeah, anyway. So enjoy Twitch, enjoy InfoSec, and with that, I'm out. Have a good day.